if I wanted to scale quickly, if I wanted sort of an all-weather asset class, US multi, Canadian multi, I did some Canadian as well. That just made the most sense. I started learning it. I joined some masterminds. I think I've paid about $100K in the past few years just in mastermind fees. It's learning, but a lot of it's just associating with people that have done it already and then making them partners. So it was just a fast track to learn. And then once you do one deal, then the second deal is easier and then third deal gets bigger. And so now I feel like it's easy to get deals, but with the portfolio, if we close this 40 million, it will be 100 million in less than 3 years. Then the question is really, how do you asset manage?
Welcome to The Wild Show with your hosts, Will Chang, Lee Chang, and Andrew Su. Hi, this is Will Chang, and as always, I have my co-hosts Lee Chang and Andrew Su with me.
Hey guys, good to be on.
Today, our guest is our friend San Eng. San is a Wall Street Journal best-selling author of the book The 10 Commandments of Investing, a collection of guiding principles from the greatest investors in history that he co-wrote with his nephew Tim and daughter Oya. San is currently focused on real estate investing in multifamily apartments with a 5-year goal to acquire and actively manage $1 billion portfolio in the top 10 growth markets like Tampa, Jacksonville, Atlanta, and Dallas. Prior to real estate, San was the co-founder and managing partner of SMC Capital, an early growth private equity firm that was ranked top 30 in China. San's current mission in life is coaching his 3 daughters through GenFire to achieve financial independence. GenFire is an educational platform whose mission is to empower 1 million parents in the next generation to achieve financial independence. Welcome, San.
Great to be here. Great seeing you guys. Thank you.
So the way we first met was through a dinner party organized by our friend Clifton. You talked about GenFire and how you raised your 3 daughters to become financially independent before the age of 21. Prior to learning that of your journey in your relationship with your kids, I'd love to give some context to the audience by learning more about your childhood. Can you talk a little bit about your childhood?
Sure. It's very different today. I was born in 1969 in China in a town called Meixian. I'm Hakka Chinese, Kejaran, in South China and Guangdong. And we got permission through a lot of maneuvering my dad did to leave China via Hong Kong to the US when I was 8. And so I still remember sort of the tail end of the Cultural Revolution. You guys are pretty too young for that, but I still remember neighbors' parents being shipped off to be shot in these trucks. So that was really my last remaining memory of living in China. And obviously feel extremely grateful and blessed that my dad, through some help of relatives in New York and the States, were able to sponsor us to go to America. So we spent about 8 months in Hong Kong and made it to New York City, Chinatown.
In your book, you kind of wrote about your experience working as a primary school student with your parents. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think it's fairly typical of a lot of immigrants, certainly our generation. So a lot of the mainland Chinese went to New York City, East Coast Chinatowns, whereas I think from some of the Taiwanese Chinese that were more middle class or educated PhDs, they ended up in the West Coast. So our family ended up in New York City and we were sponsored, as I said, by some uncles. We borrowed money. It's a lot of money. I think we were like 18,000 in debt back in 78, 79, which was a huge amount of money coming out of China with nothing. And so basically my parents spent all day in the garment factories right in Chinatown to work. And then my brothers and I went to PS 124, which is Confucius Plaza. Andrew, you're in New York, right? So you know what that is. So that's basically where we went to school. The free public breakfasts and lunches. And then we would run home, finish the homework, and then go to factories to work and then came back home with parents. And often just eat at the factory as well. So that's pretty typical of my generation.
It sounds like you grew up doing physical labor, pretty poor, and you ended up at Wharton for college, right? Can you tell us a little bit about, number one is how did you guys get into Wharton? And number two is like, what was it like basically coming from that background and then being introduced to like the Ivy League and the people around in that environment?
Yeah, so it was high school first. Well, so if you're from New York, you know that the top science-oriented schools are Stuyvesant, Brown Science, and Brooklyn Tech. So I was going to follow my brother Ed to go to Stuyv, got into Stuyv. But in 8th grade, my guidance counselor, her name is Maria Ting, she basically just called me to her office and she said, "Do you want to go to boarding school?" I'm like, "What is that?" And then she's like, "Yes, it's a very expensive school, 30, 40,000. And basically I fell off my chair. Then she said they have scholarships for minority students. Well, I think the program still exists. It's called A Better Chance. And back then, Asians were still considered minorities. It still should exist today, but primarily sponsoring Latinos and Black Americans. They'll handpick kids and you apply. And then I got lucky. I was placed at Phillips Exeter, which for 2.5 years. So I went to Stuyve for a little bit and then transferred to Exeter in scholarship. And, at these boarding schools, I mean, Stuyve is an amazing school, great kids, but in these boarding schools, you're going to school like in my dorm, there's a prince of a Middle Eastern country. We had heir of the Heinz ketchup company, just folks like that. And so you're going to class with these folks and you just open your eyes to the possibilities. And so from there, Ivy League was not even a question mark. It was just like, we're going to go. So I'm still trying to stay in touch with Miss Ting because I had no idea. My parents were like, oh, I don't have to feed you? Yeah, go. Basically, that was the answer. It's like, they didn't know what it was. You get to stay in a free dorm? Yeah, go. Nobody had an idea what that was back then. So it was pretty cool. So Miss Ting basically changed my life.
So I'm going to move fast forward a little bit. You've had a storied career in China as an entrepreneur and investor. And as someone that spent time in China, Lee, as well, I know how difficult that landscape is. And it's incredibly impressive how you navigated it. I mean, you were born in China, but you left at the age of 9, meaning that you're pretty much American, right? And so how did you end up in China and how did you get your start there?
Sure. So after college, I did corporate for a little bit, strategy consulting, and then worked for a PE firm, AIG Investments, and just didn't enjoy myself in corporate. And so from my late 20s, I just been on my own. And so I was part of the dot-com wave. I joined and I became eventually CFO and CEO of a internet telephony company. Back then, that was a thing. And there are a few companies that went public. We were at the time the largest US-China sort of focus, US-Asia one. So we raised about 60 million in my 20s. And we were engaged by Lehman Bear Stearns to do a dual Hang Seng and NASDAQ IPO. We actually missed the window for about 2 weeks. We were actually starting the pre-market. So we missed that window. We ended up not getting the hundreds of millions of valuation and selling the company at a much lower stake. So prior to doing that, my board had advised me to hire a good-looking CEO, a public CEO, a public-face CEO. And so we recruited the former head of global telecoms for BCG. He's currently actually the CEO of Carney, the consulting firm, to be our CEO. And I actually became vice chairman, was going to retire. And so while Alex was running that company, I decided to move to Shanghai to just study for 2 years to get my MBA from SEEPS. And then we just ended up staying 17 years. So ended up just raising a fund out of Shanghai.
Tell me about how you ended up starting a fund out of Shanghai and like that entire journey. Like, what was it like? I mean, being somebody that went to MBA in Shanghai and then basically go out and raising money for a fund.
Sure. Well, when did you leave China?
I think I spent 2011, 2013.
Yeah. Okay. I think I was luckier. I think the earlier you go, if you're a foreigner or if you're an ABC, Asian American, you had more advantage. That advantage became more marginal over time. Right now, it's primarily no advantage. So when I was there in 2001, being Asian American with those Ivy League degrees actually was seen as an asset. Even though my Chinese wasn't perfect, it got better. It was seen as an asset. And so when I was in B school, I went to executive MBA there. My classmates looked up to me. So a lot of things. You could tell they were certainly younger and smarter and more China savvy. So in 3-5 years, you see them basically taking over a lot of things. So some might have been like a HR manager or HP, but 5 years later, they're like CEO of China. So this is a lot of migration and it makes sense, right? It's not that hard to learn some of the business concepts. A lot of it is this relationship knowing the local market. So I think I got there luckily early enough and said, I got to do something and felt it was a good time to invest. And so it took 18 months. To land my first institutional, but the timing was still good. So once I got the first institutional, which was a government entity, it helped me to sell myself as a savvy China guy. And we were then able to attract a number of established European family offices. For example, the largest family owner of BMW at the time, the wealthiest Swiss family were LPs. We were able to attract Mirai Asset from Korea, because they all want entree into China. So it was just building that relationship with the Chinese side to show that we have some juice, some guanxi. And it turned out that it was one of my business school classmates who connected me and ended up being our first institutional Chinese LP. And then so we actually ended up setting up the first US dollar RMB sort of mixed fund, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar. Now, most funds are in RMB. It used to be either dollar or RMB. And there's a lot of restrictions in what you cannot invest and how you can or cannot exit. And so we set up a joint venture RMB US dollar fund. It was commingled and it was complex. We don't do that anymore. But back then, that was one way to bring the money in and put together the USD versus the RMB. So a lot more complicated than I think. I probably wouldn't do it again, but it was the only choice at the time.
Do you still remember your pitch and how it was refined as you were trying to close that first local LP?
Well, it's the reflection of foreign versus local, right? So you line up the foreign guys and say, I have connections to all these prestigious, super savvy foreign LPs that are institutional. If you give me $1 on the China side, I'll match it more on the US side. And then you go to the US side and you say, hey, I got these things. And so it's really kind of like see which one bites first and resolve that chicken and egg. We did have, through my contacts, the leads to the foreign side, but they were interested. But pretty much they said, if you want to do a cross-border China fund, and our pitch was helping the GP that would help foreign companies expand into China by investing. And then our pitch to the China guys was the opposite of that. And so we had the Europeans and the Koreans interested, but they wouldn't commit until we had the big Chinese institutional. And I would say the China side was harder because it was so new to the Chinese. Yeah, we literally were the first institutional GP to set up in Wuxi, China, for example. We were the first GP. And we were the first GP to set up an entity in Dalian, in Dongbei, right? Northern China. That's even harder. We basically had a ribbon cutting because there had been no other such funds, US dollar or joint venture. And so the Chinese side was about a lot more educating, a lot more drinking, a lot more guanxi driven.
Yeah. So I'm curious, going back to being an investor, well, first starting in consulting, correct? And then being at AIG, how did you see and make that transition into co-founding this telephony company?
Yeah, it's a good question. So consulting was great because I started first in New York. And then, as you know, every 3-6 months, you have a different project. So I ended up traveling to a number of cities for different projects in the States and Canada. Then I got recruited to be based in Hong Kong with Kearney. I worked for Kearney for a few years there. And it was fantastic because they were just building up the practice. And so I had really the pick of my project. So I ended up in like 2.5 years with Kearney. I was in like 5 or 6 different countries. And there was almost like no fat. This guy called Frank Robert, he was a global head of telecom, and me. And we just got along. And so he kept winning these telecom and mobile phone projects. And basically I was a default analyst. There's a few other analysts, but there wasn't a lot of management layers like you would find, like say McKinsey or BCG in New York or Hong Kong or other bigger practices. So I just ended up getting all this access to CEOs, pitching directly to CEOs of multi-billion-dollar companies because Frank trusted me. So again, I just got very lucky with timing, or whether it's a fund or joining these groups. But after 3 or 4 years, if you guys have done consulting, it's pretty much recycle stuff, right? The content's fairly recycled in terms of the learnings. And so I was looking to do something else. I couldn't find a private equity job at the time. It was difficult. And so I did a startup for a little bit. And another Wharton alum who ran the AIG group recruited me to some networking to join. It was somebody I actually pitched like a couple of years ago. They didn't have an opening. And then 2 years later, he just remembered me and just called me. So it wasn't even a competition. So it's kind of lucky, but obviously it's not. There's also some legwork there, right? Like those things in business. Yeah.
Right. And to your point, I think there was a huge window in the discrepancy between when you went to China and when Will and I landed foot in 2011. I think just the rapid growth and change that happened was night and day, right? To your point of how they looked at foreigners and best practices and just the lack of like know-how versus when we got there, it was already close to the transition and tipping point where they no longer needed not even people that are bilingual, but if you weren't super localized, if you didn't have local knowledge and didn't know how business was done, like there was nothing they really needed from people like Will and myself. So yeah, timing's one, but I'm sure also it took a lot of seeing the right opportunities and then focusing on really diving into those spaces as you did, right? And then transitioning into your next gig.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say it's really not just about time, but it's also just basically being able to create those opportunities, right? Because I'm sure during the time that you were in China, it was like the Wild Wild West, and there's probably a lot of chaos going on. And I'd love to learn more about just kind of like how you saw and looked at deals and what those Chinese companies were like that you were investing in.
Sure. Can I actually ask, what were you guys doing in China? in 2011?
Yeah, so both me and Lee went to Tsinghua for business school.
Oh,
And
wow.
then, so I basically dropped out a semester in to start a company out there. It was like an e-commerce company for 2 years. They did an e-commerce startup.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And how many years did you guys stay?
I stayed for 2 years. I think Lee was there for a little bit longer.
Honestly, yeah, fully in China for about 3. But after B school, so I finished at Tsinghua. And then I joined corporate strategic investments at Foxconn. So I was still kind of bouncing around Taipei, Shenzhen, and Greater China, but I wasn't fully based there after that. So
Gotcha.
yeah,
So not that long of a time, but long enough to have the exposure and the connections, right? Yeah. Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. Well, I had exited, at least time-wise, the startup in LA. So I wasn't working when I was doing my MBA. So I ended up just running, for example, I was running the Wharton. I was on the board of the Wharton Alumni Club. So we did a lot of events. I did a lot of Siebes events as well. So it was just pure networking. I ran a lot of poker games and then met a lot of VC people, entrepreneurship people. So, just through a couple of years of that, you kind of get a sense of what's needed. And at the time, there had been some of the branded Valley VCs in there, right? They came in, Barry Sequoia was there. Quite a few firms were there, but there was not that many early growth. So that was the opportunity. And that was what I was interested in. And so that was I think the strategy was pretty straightforward in terms of what the fund would do. Again, it was just getting the chess pieces together, which took a lot longer than I thought it would be 6 months. But again, it took 18 months to land the first institutional.
So how long did you spend on it? And then I know that you ended up exiting 5 years ago, right?
Maybe no longer than that. So we actually was going to do a 50 million fund one, but once we had the pieces together, we ended up quickly closing it oversubscribed at 100. So spent a few years investing that. And then there's a number of issues related to the fund ownership, the brand ownership, but also my kids having grown up quite a bit. And at the time, even in Shanghai, there's a lot of pollution. So Chloe, my number 2, we tested her and the chemicals in the blood were like 20x what she should be. And at the time she was quite feral. And so after the test, we basically decided I was already marketing fund 2. We were going to do a 450 fund 2 from the 100. And we had soft commitments from most of the major LPs. But I ended up essentially exiting that business when I was 45, exactly. And then just kind of selling everything. Not necessarily in retrospect, the timing was actually quite good, but more like I just felt like I needed to spend some time with my kids. My parents were in New York and they were not that healthy. So at 45, I just said, I'm going to just take 5 years off. Like literally just, I'm going to just not have staff for 5 years and just do stuff, like mainly with the kids and with my parents. And it's always bittersweet. The friends around the poker table that are still GPs in China, I think all of them are $1 billion plus now. And that's a nice business when you're $1 billion plus. It's a franchise because you're in fund 3, fund 4. Once you get there, you're made. I missed out on that. But then I had 5 amazing years with my kids. I took my parents. My mom passed away during COVID. So I would be completely guilty if I didn't spend that time with them. So it's a net positive, but also you miss that too. It'd be nice to have 9-figure AUM, right? It becomes a franchise.
What year was it that you left Shanghai, son?
I just turned 54 yesterday. So I left around just about 10 years ago.
Mid-2010s.
When I was 45.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So I would say that the year prior, we sold everything. I divested all I could of the fund 1. And then somebody else took over a much smaller fund 2. After I left, the commitment wasn't 450, it was like 50 million. And somebody else took that over. So that franchise just went away, but we sold as much as we could. The market kept going up for a couple of years. But again, I'm happy about that because obviously right now you'll be stuck with it. Right now it's very tough to exit. So left a little bit cream at the top, I think. But overall, I think we were lucky enough to have, again, I couldn't read the timing. I didn't see that coming. I just felt that for family reasons, it was a time to go. Yeah.
So one more question about that. So this was early growth, you said. And what kind of companies and investments were you looking to do at the time?
Yeah. So it would be early growth means they're post-product. They have some revenues. Often they have EBITDA. And so it was a mixture of, we had 16 now portfolios, a mixture of tech. We had one NASDAQ IPO, a internet infrastructure company called 21 Vinet, Siji Hulian. Actually don't know if they're still around, but most were not looking to 10x or 100x like the VCs. Most were 2 or 3x's. We did a boarding school chain. I did a bunch of retailers, chains, food chains. I did a cosmetic surgery chain. I did a couple of clean tech. They all died, more or less. I would not do clean tech again because it's so regulation driven, right? Mm-hmm. You could have the best tech out of Beijing, but nobody in Wuxi would buy it. It just didn't. Yeah. So our dogs were the clean tech. We actually had a clean tech partner that was super impressive. And luckily we only did like three or four of them. And I think all of them lost money. The other ones all did okay. So yeah. So yeah, it's a mixture of consumer and tech.
So it's funny you mentioned 21 Bionet because I used to do cross-border early stage and I spent some time with a fund called I Harper Group. And so they had also been an early investor in that company as well and had done quite well. And I'm sure there's so many stories I'd love to ask about this. Maybe we can bring it back for another episode, San. But just that time when, to your point, there was, I guess, just this lack of information flow. And I think a lot of LPs or investors globally were interested in China, but didn't have people on the ground. To your point, you were like one guy. I knew a lot of people that were sent there as like the first analyst or the first kind of exploratory employee to go and invest in China. And from some of the early stories I heard from people that got there in the early 2000s, there were companies hungry for capital and couldn't find investors because the idea of like venture capital was still so new. Right. And so the amount of opportunity that was there and also potentially missed by, investors as well is pretty fascinating. So
Agree. Yeah.
yeah, it's just crazy how quickly China has become such a self-perpetuating, now domestic kind of inspired machine now. Whereas back then it was still kind of Wild Wild West and everything was so new.
Yeah. We're all Chinese. Chinese are smart and we work hard. Chinese brothers in China are making us less useful in China.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
It's surprising, but it's also not surprising if you think about it. Like the speed is very surprising, how fast it just turned, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So basically 45, you semi-retired, you came back to the States and you spent 5 years really spending that time, quality time with your family and watching your daughters grow up and spending time with your parents. But 5 years into it, you were hungry for more, right? And so you basically started looking to real estate. Can you tell us a little bit about real estate and why you decided to transition?
Yeah, actually, we left Shanghai for Taiwan. So we spent a bit of time in Taiwan. So we wanted the kids to be more culturally sensitive and disciplined education, but culture-wise at a certain age, which is really due to tweens. So they went to Taipei American School. And then in Shanghai, they went to YK Pao, which is bilingual. And I went to Exeter boarding school. So for the kids, it was a consideration. My oldest ended up applying last minute to Exeter and she got in. And so from Taipei, we moved to Toronto for a few years. And so your mom and my youngest, who's 16, is still in Toronto. The older two are now in college or going to college. So that was a plan in 5 years to be pretty much more or less self-sufficient, right? Certainly don't want to hang out with the old man anymore as much. And so during that 5 years, I also did a lot of learning. Like it was amazing learning. Like I spent 2.5 years when the kids were in school. I traveled the world. I went to Ethereum. You guys talked about crypto. I went to a couple of Ethereum conferences, Cancun, and just all over, just meeting interesting people because intellectually, I couldn't get it. I still don't 100% get it. And I kept diving deeper and deeper to try to figure out how things worked, right? So I drank the Kool-Aid for a bit too, did a whole bunch of ICOs and deals. But after a while, like if I don't see a use case, I slow down a bit. And then the question is, and I'd love to hear your journey too, right? Journey is, well, okay, the kids are growing up. I got to keep busy, but I don't want a full-time job necessarily. Economy is looking pretty crappy. Even back 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years, you can kind of see things are not firing up. And so real estate just made sense from a generational standpoint. So I just decided to spend more time in real estate and try to build a portfolio. Initially, I was just going to buy a few and cash flow, but I kind of got hooked. It's fun and it's fun doing bigger and bigger deals versus just doing 5 units. We're under contract now for a 230 unit. So it becomes a high, right? Getting a deal structure negotiated, getting it funded, getting the debt, all that stuff. And then portfolio management also very challenging. So I'm just enjoying it. Yeah.
Yeah, that transition from China PE fund to real estate is a very different one, right? And so I was very curious in terms of how you ended up learning, understanding the process, and really figuring out how to make money in real estate.
Yeah. So during COVID, my brother Edmund, who's 2 years older than me, I don't know if you guys know, SoftBank actually had a public vehicle in Hang Seng, sort of SME investment bank. So my bro, Ed, was the CEO of that. He was Morgan Stanley IBD, but he ended up running that vehicle for SoftBank for a number of years, running around all over Asia doing deals. So he and I met a lot of smart people, much more so. And so we ended up over the course of 12 years, just taking these cliff notes. We met XYZ, or we did a deal with ABC, and just taking these cliff notes. And we collectively had a whole couple hundred pages of, hey, these are what smart investors do. Not us, but what these guys did. And we called it an investor's Bible. Right before COVID, we found a publisher who was interested in publishing it. Then COVID hit. Ia, my daughter, came home, and then Timmy went home. Timmy was a senior at Columbia. My daughter was a senior at Exeter. And they both read the Bible and they said, guys, this is not going to sell. It's crap. It's just like so thick and technical and just damn boring. And that's how we got them to get involved. They say, okay, if you think you're so good, why don't you edit it? So during COVID, Timmy and Ia ended up basically doing surgery in the book, making it a lot simpler. If you guys read the book, it's actually a very simple book to read. And instead of cliff notes, it's just like, well, what ties it all together, right? And we came out with this thing called 10 Commandments, which is catchy, but also makes sense. And so long story short, we published a book, but I also feel those learnings, whether it's talking to Kathy or Eva or just reading a book about Buffett, I do think those 10 C's more or less do it, whether it's crypto or blockchain or real estate. So I'm just trying to practice the 10 C's. And then from there, it was just looking at different asset classes. So for the next few years, I invested in a lot of different things. I did farmland. I invested in real estate debt. I even invested in a black soldier fly company trying to learn tag, obviously crypto. And long story short, I just felt like if I wanted to scale quickly, if I wanted sort of an all-weather asset class, US multi and Canadian multi, I did some Canadian as well. That just made the most sense. I started learning it. I joined some masterminds. I think I've paid about $100K in the past few years just in mastermind fees. It's learning, but a lot of it's just associating with people that have done it already and then making them partners. So it was just a fast track to learn. And then once you do one deal, then the second deal is easier and then third deal gets bigger. And so now I feel like it's easy to get deals, but with the portfolio, if we close this 40 million, it will be 100 million in less than 3 years. Then the question is really, how do you asset manage?
So you actually brought Ia into looking at deals with you over the summer, right? Could you tell us a little bit about kind of like how you got her involved and training her into looking at deals and that entire process?
Yeah, we talked about it. Well, at that dinner, I have 3 older brothers and 2 of them, they're engineers, still want their kids to get a stable job after school. I've never really enjoyed a stable job. So I've always sort of pushed my kids to think about passive income, whether it's 4-hour work week or rich dad, poor dad. And whether or not they choose it, I can't force it, but they're being exposed to, even to FF meeting fraternity guys or warden events, or just being exposed. And so when Ear came back to me and said she doesn't want to get a job, she wants to learn. So I signed her up for the mastermind with me. She signed up when she was 17. The official age is 18, so they made an exception for her to join. So she spent 2 years, 1 year doing school, and then 1 year doing a gap year between college and high school to do it on and off, to learn underwriting. And then they all know that I will stop supporting the financially 18. That was the deal we told them. And so she knows that she has to close the deal. So we closed the deal.
What was the deal that she closed?
Again, timing is so important because she started studying this thing during COVID and then she took a gap year and COVID was still on and off. So we actually couldn't travel. We all love to travel, right? And so we got in the car and we drove. We literally drove Toronto, New York to Florida, to Texas and back to look at deals and markets. So over the 2 years, again, she wasn't full-time. She was on and off because sometimes often she got sick of me. She got sick of real estate. She would take some time off. That was fine. But over the course of that initial 2 years, we went to a lot of markets. We did a lot of underwriting. And then she stopped for 6 months. She was traveling. And then in May of last year, before she was going to start school, she asked to spend a month in Tampa. And we went out every single day, looked at big deals and small deals. And we ended up finding and liking this 12-unit deal, $2.2 million deal, and we locked it in. So again, it's one of those things. It's lucky. The seller is an older guy. His name is Ed. He had 2 kids that graduated from U Chicago. Ia was incoming U Chicago. So instantly there was this bond, 2 daughters in this one. He was smartly telling it and how this is her dream to close a deal. And we didn't really have to negotiate on price. We just got into contract. And so it's lucky, but also she really worked for it, right? She had made underwritten dozens of deals and we made a number of offers that were just rejected. So for her work, she underwrote the deal. She did the research. We ended up doing a webinar to syndicate, even though we didn't need the money, just a small deal, but it was this. So she got involved, all that, set up the portal, all that. And then she pitched investors initially with me, but after a couple of times, she's like, I don't need you. So she raised a chunk of the money. It was mostly my leads, but she pitched them often solo. And so she has a quarter of the carry interest. And she took out a $10,000 acquisition fee, for which $7,000 went to pay for U Chicago. She still owes me $90,000. No, it's true. She was complaining and she's with me now. She was complaining. You took 7,000. Like, yeah, you still owe me more. But, but then 3,000, she got to buy some sneakers. She got to buy some gifts for her kids and used part of that for travel. So, I mean, it works out okay. Yeah, when we exit a deal, she'll make a nice double six figures.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing the type of opportunity just to even just understand the world at such a young age, or understand like the type of opportunities, kind of similar to how when you went to Exeter and you kind of saw the world open up for you, you were doing that for your daughter. It's really interesting, kind of like this journey that you've gone. I've actually watched a bunch of your videos from Wizard Institute in terms of how you interviewed like Kathy Xu, like the China's queen of venture capital, and a lot of other investors to kind of prepare for your book, The 10 Commandments of Investing. You wrote this book with your daughter. You took her on these real estate deals, and now that's inspired you to start GenFire. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that is and why it's your mission in life?
Yeah. I think it's a lot of why you guys do podcasts. We spoke earlier. Well, Andrew and Lee is people that I want to meet don't necessarily want to meet me. And having a podcast or YouTube that don't have followers, which is my case, it's tough to convince them to spend time. And I enjoy spending time with people 100 times more successful and smarter. It's fantastic. And Kathy, I've known, we were neighbors, but had not talked for 5 or 6 years. I remember maybe having emailed her because my kids ended up in primary school together, but not necessarily getting responses. But when I reached out to her about the book and saying, hey, we want to feature you and your insights along with Buffett and Dalio and others, she instantly replied and gave me, I think I asked for 60, ended up doing 90 minutes, which is fantastic. Just learned so much from her, right? That was a selfish motive. The GenFire is related to the first book in the sense that a lot of parents are asking, oh, how do we work with IA? How do we share the content? And I have 2 younger daughters too. And I don't want them to suffer as much as IA did working directly with me. And I say that with all honesty because it's very difficult. I'm fairly impatient, but I think any parent with a teenage kid driving around 20,000 miles, underwriting real estate, I think I'm not the most patient person. And so I think that was really difficult. So I felt like maybe if we enlarge the mission so that we're just about me, but maybe we create GenFire to make it a bigger platform, bigger mission, would attract better content in terms of interviewees and maybe speakers to our platform. And then the next stage, which we haven't launched yet, is to create a community of maybe like-minded parents and their children and then form peer groups, right? So that, let's say, my 2 younger kids who are 16 and 18, they're here with me right now, and I can tell they're getting too much of me. So we haven't launched it, but I would love it maybe in the next 6-12 months, we get a group together. So Chloe and Ia are actually with a bunch of peers and they get a mentor that's younger. And so we lined up a bunch of 20, 30 somethings that are actually really successful, right? And they can be the mentors. And I'm just being a dad, maybe guiding them. I feel like that would be much more effective and a lot less painful. So that's that goal. And then we said, well, to really do all this, well, since we're learning anyways, right? Why not have this big vision of GenFire, which is, hey, if we're going to interview 100 super successful investors, which the insights which would go into the sequel, as Will said, the first book is 10 Commandments of Investing, which is principles and strategies, right? The second book is really talking to Grant Cardone, talking to hopefully Kathy again, and really drill down to how we invest in certain asset class from a tactical standpoint, right? To create generational wealth. The second book is called 10 Commandments to Generational Wealth. So if we're going to do that, we might as well make it a bigger platform to share with more people. But then it becomes self-fulfilling in the sense that we are able to attract even more successful people. Pretty stoked about it because it's working out well right now.
I remember when we had the dinner, there was maybe like 50 people there. So Clifton, who introduced us, basically sent out an email to a bunch of people in LA. And he was like, basically what you're doing is you're basically training your kids to be financially independent. And the entire room that came out for you were all interested in learning how to basically instill that philosophy to their kids. And I remember basically you were telling the crowd, and even I think just now you talked about basically the first 2 books that you bought your daughters were Rich Dad Poor Dad and 4-Hour Workweek. Those 2 actually were the most instrumental books in my own life too. I read them in college. Yeah, those are my favorite books. Because as an Asian American immigrant, you are trained to think in a certain way, right? Rich Dad Poor Dad kind of like changes the way that you look at things completely. And then 4-Hour Workweek then doubles down on that. And I think like 10 Commandments to Generational Wealth will be another book similar to that for that generation. I'm very excited about that.
Wow. Well, those are big shoes to fill. Well, we'll see. I just want to keep learning from smarter people, right? And then if we can distill that into something that's digestible, I think that's kind of cool.
I know that you have a newsletter, right, for GenFire, like 10,000 subscribed. Is that right?
Yeah, we're about 11 now. The brand itself is only about 3 months because we had previously used something called Wizards Institute. We changed it to GenFire because it's a bit catchier and more appropriate to the mission. Some of the context came from the book purchases and whatnot. So 11 or 12,000 now. We're hoping to get it to six figures in the next, I don't know, 6, 12 months, hopefully. And then it becomes much easier to then go to somebody like a Dalio or hopefully another Kathy and say, hey, we want to feature you, right? And again, the marketing is if we grow this newsletter and we're really interviewing like genuinely successful, smart people that deliver value for the audience. And we're then, unlike the first book, TikToking or doing each segment has 10 seconds in English. Maybe we then use AI to help get it into 5 languages and have 10 seconds. Then we're elevating, we're genuinely getting amazing people. Then we're delivering the insight into the format that young people want. Then maybe we get 50 of these videos out per interview. We're helping to share smart insights. Then we're helping the guests, but certainly we're then helping the GenFire audience as well. We're still trying to work this out. I literally had a meeting earlier today, team members from the Philippines. We're going to use Riverside as you guys are using, but we're trying to figure out how do we automate AI, the transcription, and then automate the transcription, having the AI to tell us which quotes would be most social media savvy, and then having the AI to chop these into 10 videos and having the AI to do the 5 languages. And I said, this is what we want. And right now there's no solution, no perfect solution. So it has to be a mixture of automation and some cut and paste, right? So you guys have done this a lot longer. So maybe our guys can reach out to you for help.
Yeah, I'm happy to help. I at least know the YouTube to the TikTok / YouTube Shorts like game. And I can give you tools to basically, if you want all AI to basically do it, or do you want like more hands-on, or do you want like expert level? Like I have different levels that you can try out. I'll send to you later.
Okay. Yeah. It's very sexy just learning these new tools, right? It's just very cool. If we could automate that, then I can just spend all day doing interviews of smart people and not have to worry about processing the distribution, right? Yeah. So,
I mean, that's the goal, right? Is basically being able to do what you love to do. And for me as well, the whole part that I really love is the learning part and the relationship part, right? All the other stuff like that comes with it is just work. And if you can figure out how to get yourself out of that work, then you get to basically do what you love to do every single day. So that's the goal.
I mean, you guys do such a great prepping. It's a responsibility. Like tomorrow we have Alan. If he gives me an hour, I feel like I have to do him justice, right? Because he's a friend, but he's giving me this time and he's so busy. Then I'm sure he's going to tell us some amazing insights, but I want to share that. So I had originally blocked 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. every Tuesday to then load this up with interviews. My team said, no, we're not quite there yet. So we're just doing 1 or 2 a week until we get the automation set up. So,
I mean, it's also just basically being able to get because I mean, you've already done like a bunch of interviews already, but getting your reps in, because it's actually quite exhausting every single interview. I personally, even though I've been doing this for such a long time, I get really nervous before the interview because I want to do such a good job. And having to do multiple at the same time, like I just don't have the energy. The next one, if I were to do another one of this afterwards, it would suffer because I don't have the energy to basically give that investment as much anymore. Well, at least for me, it has to be authentic, like authentic interest in learning. And then if I were to do a second one afterwards, I would have to fake it almost, right? Because I had to
your brain is drained.
Yeah. And then I think the audience can feel that as well.
Gotcha. So, no, that's great insight. So I haven't done that. So maybe we'll slice it into Tuesdays and Thursdays.
But I mean, I think once you do it over a certain period of time, I think it's easier. I know, like, for example, Tim Ferriss, he basically just has 1 full day of interviews and basically he just gets through them and then he uses all those interviews to basically space it out. So he doesn't have to work that much on the actual interviews. But I think that's like expert level. Yeah, then you have to work your way up there.
Yeah, he's good. I listened to, he's really good. Yeah.
So, San, I kind of want to take it back because you went to Phillips Exeter as a means of going through the program and being placed there. And also you mentioned that your oldest daughter also went to Phillips Exeter. And being the child of immigrants and attending that school, I'm very curious. We talked about the positives that it did for you, but I want to kind of dig a little deeper into your psyche in terms of, did you feel this kind of angst of wanting to kind of prove to your peers, to the world? And what kind of like experiences you have there? Because it kind of reminded for me, one of my favorite movies growing up was School Ties. And so I'm very curious. You mentioned there are all these like old money trust fund kids there. How did you integrate there? And what were some of the lessons you learned as you progressed? And then as you had daughters, and our co-host Andrew is a new dad with a beautiful young daughter as well. How did you see them grow and wanting to instill, perhaps looking back at your growth and evolution and things that you didn't know or mistakes that you made and wanting to instill those in your daughters? And this is turning to a long question, but we'll get there. I'm also curious, as they grew and having lived in different cities, in different parts of the world with completely different cultures, how you've seen them change and evolve and what you're trying to do for them as well as they get into adulthood.
It's a great series of questions. Yeah, I think my experience at Exeter is really night and day versus years experience at Exeter. And my second one, Chloe, just graduated Loomis Chaffee as well. I think they enjoyed it a lot more at the time. They're very different schools, but they both have tremendous experiences. You can tell, you really get to know your kids when they start applying to prep school because they have to write essays, right? So they do apply to high school, prep school. They'll always go back to what has impacted their lives. And then when they do college, you see the same thing, what topics they choose. So you can tell by that process that both really loved the school for them. They really enjoyed it at the moment. And so I'm glad, despite the crazy cost, that we were funding that. So basically for them, they got in, they spoke perfect English. They were not poor and dirty. And they were at similar, if not higher levels than their peers. So they were fine. I mean, it wasn't easy, but they were fine. I hated it when I was there for my 2.5. So I got into STI for 10th grade. I went there for half a year. I think my GPA, without working that hard, because I was still working school at the factories in my Chinese restaurant, it's like an easy 94, right, at STI. Then I transferred to Exeter, and I think my GPA was like a B minus average. It was just a different environment. Academically, on top of all the money there, as you said. So I was absolutely the geek. I was hazed. Do you guys know what a wedgie is?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was given quite a few little wedgies.
Very familiar.
You are? They're banned now. Back then, it was too good.
Oh, really? I didn't
So
know they're illegal or banned in schools now.
they don't do that now in prep school, as far as I know. But back then, I had kids that gave me wedgies. It's just language issues. People that have money smell people that don't have money like 2 miles away. They just know, right? And part of my scholarship wasn't 100%. There was a work study. So then you get assigned. And my first year was assigned to work to dining. And basically that's a label says that you're a poor kid. You're serving the other guys, right? And then you come back out very dirty. And so the experience of there wasn't really enjoyable until probably my second half of senior year. But it doesn't really matter, right? Because it's just supposed to make you stronger, right? So it's like running a marathon. You kind of suffer, but then you have to look at the positives, which there are so many. You got a great education. I got to hang out with a lot of geeks, the losers, all right? And they're quite successful.
But you say that you obviously came out for the better, but not everybody is able to really be as resilient or to carry certain trauma or having beliefs, perhaps subconsciously limiting themselves, believing in potential glass ceiling of sorts, right? And to your point, your daughters had a different experience, but having seen them grow from being a baby to adolescent and now into college, knowing that what you have provided for them, how are you trying to perhaps also give them a bit of that fire and chip on the shoulder type of mentality? Maybe they weren't hazed and no wedgies for them, thank goodness. But how do you give them that hunger that you had?
It would be probably similar to you guys, right? You guys are all driven and successful. I think you emulate your parents out of guilt, Asian guilt, part of that. I think that's probably part of it, right? Is that spot on?
Yeah, I mean, like your parents sacrificed for you, right? I mean, it's really interesting. Basically, you and your daughter went to the same school, and your entire life journey of suffering and working hard and basically investing in your future changed the experience for your daughters in a generation where they no longer felt like they didn't belong. That was all you. We went around the world to basically create that for your daughters.
You could probably say the same about your parents too, right? I'm not sure if you guys are first gen or second gen. And I don't think it's just to Asians or Chinese. I think it's the same for all immigrants. I think a lot of it's just guilt. They see you doing things and I think they do emulate. I feel like that the kids, even if they're protesting, they do emulate. I'm sure you guys can maybe confirm, hopefully not deny that. The other thing is the sport. So I just trying to get healthy. So the same thing with GenFire, I'm now in a mindset now where I'm going to just announce it. I want to get to 1 million GenFire impact. I'm going to announce like last year I signed up for the triathlon. I'm going to just announce it. I usually check the non-refundable. Now I was non-refundable. Then I tell my kids about it.
No
I tell
turning
my
back.
dad about it. I put it on social media, right? There's just no way you're going to back out, right? The great thing about St. Pete and Tampa is there's all these groups, right? I'll tell you a funny story. So I signed up for the St. Pete Mad Dogs, which is the oldest triathlon group here. I think the average age is 77. There's a woman in her 90s that does triathlons. I'm talking about full triathlons. And so for 3 months, I biked, I swam, I ran with these folks, and it's like 5 or 6 days a week. And you just can't quit because like if you're running and you want to quit and some like 65-year-old just breezes by, you're like, there's no way I'm stopping. And it's the same thing on the bike. These 70-year-old ladies just pass by, right? So try to do these things. The Spartan tried that as well. And I just feel like I'm going to just announce it. I flew my daughter in for the try and I feel like, well, I'm just going to finish it. I feel like that part of it helps to inspire them. And I think they're coming around to doing one with me. Hopefully, Lee, I think that's part of the thing. I think sports and competitive sport, I think gives them that edge. So I don't know, what other tricks do you guys have on the parenting side? I'm learning too.
I actually wanted to reframe Lee's question, which is, so what advice or method of delivering advice to your kids for resilience have you found that work? So it's obvious that, right, like you're showing it by example, not to mention you already talked about joking or not joking that they're cut off from a certain amount of port at 18, right? And you're jumping in, you're doing things big, but I'm sure some of the ways you've tried with them hasn't landed. So I'm curious, like what's landed? And yeah, have you had like specific conversations about like resilience when they're in a tough situation? Or is it more, you can tell you're leading by example? I'm curious about that, right? Because my kid gets older, it's like something I'll be thinking.
Yeah, you got some time to go, Andrew. I think at the dinner, we talked about the puppy game, Will. And I thought of that. Any of you guys Taiwanese?
We're all Taiwanese.
You know the type in American school?
Yeah,
Right. Yeah. And any of you went there?
Lee did for a bit.
Okay. Yeah.
Just middle school. Yeah.
There's quite a lot of wealthy, right, folks there. And so I remember we came from Shanghai and they went to primary and then they went to TS for a few years. And we met a lot of really wealthy, super smart parents. And there were just a few that, should I say, not all, but few that we met, we felt were buying their way for the kids, right? So there's a guy whose son is a pretty talented basketball player. And I remember him telling me when we were drinking one night that they had moved to the States and they were in not a competitive district because they're in a private school. I remember the dad proudly, after a lot of shots, saying that he had donated scholarships to the school with the explicit instructions to the school to go and import scholarship kids from the low end school so that his son's team would be more competitive, right? I mean, that's pretty wild if you think about it, right? So, because obviously the son knows about it. I don't know if I've done that unconsciously, but consciously I try to avoid giving it to them. I think the kids know. I think the kids know, even if you don't tell them, they feel it. And so the win isn't really a win. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that I hopefully did right. So we talked about the puppy game. So they wanted a puppy. Well, we're not going to give it to them. Even though I wanted to have a puppy, so we make them work for 6 months. So we devised a game. I didn't talk into much detail, but I could probably create a game out of it as well. Obviously, being Chinese, there was math behind it. So 3 kids, they each had to work collectively to earn enough points. And the points are from different things. So we had a thing called table topics. So it was a big cookie jar. And we put in all these cards in there that has different topics, politics, math, whatever. And then before they ate, they each had to pick a topic, which is randomly, and they had to discuss it at the table, right? And then they get a point if they follow that rule, and then that adds up to the puppy game. And then that ties into grades and schools and community. You guys are like, see, what? So over 6 months, you engineer it so that they do win if they participate. And so we did that twice. Once in Shanghai, once in Taipei. So we had puppy game 1 and puppy game 2. And I felt that was good because it made them do all these things, right? And then they earned it. So just stuff like that. I feel like a little weird that if you're not working, you have time for it. So I'll sell it to you, Andrew, when your kid gets older.
Done. Yeah, definitely. I'll give you a call. You might have productized it by then.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to bring it back again. This is kind of how I look at it, is that, you mentioned the interesting topic of the emulation and maybe perhaps the guilt that your daughters or any Asian children have as they get older, perhaps appreciating what their parents have done for them. But I think that that's a part of it. But I think that I don't know. And actually, this might be interesting. We might, if Yeo would be interested, perhaps we can bring her on as a guest at some point as well. But I think that perhaps the guilt and the kind of feeling of perhaps owing to our parents, and there's only so much that takes you. I think that perhaps you were a disciplinarian. I don't know, son. Like maybe you were a tough dad and you said you're tough to work with. But what you're doing now with GenFire, I think seeing that there's certain things that you did when you had to, but now giving back. So doing things that perhaps were selfish or in the mindset of this is what I need to do or what I want to get done. And then now doing things selflessly, I think is probably a factor too that, because I think children these days, I think from our generation and younger, a lot of it is no longer trying to find the next meal, right? And so we're now no longer inspired by just trying to scrape to get by. And there has to be meaning behind things we do and why. And I imagine that is part of the reason, basically showing by doing, right? And I love to believe that that's part of how you are also passing that along to your children.
I mean, it's not only just by doing, right? Because a lot of parents work hard. I think what's interesting about kind of seeing what you're doing and being able to emulate that is that you're creating opportunities for yourself to do what you like to do, right? These things that your daughter is watching you do, they're created out of thin air. You didn't apply for it, application to basically get into somewhere where you could do these things, but you literally just came up with an idea and then just went to go figure out how do you get the information and how do you meet the right people in order to turn an idea into a reality. And you've done it multiple times over your life. And I think just having your daughter just watch you do that will give her kind of like signals or like a pathway in terms of creating her own reality as well.
Yeah. I think entrepreneurship, I suppose. And again, I'm not there yet by far, right? Year's 20 now. She's done one deal. She was obviously helped along the way. I wouldn't say she's financially independent yet. And my other two kids are more not that interested in business. So they're 16 and 18. So there's a gun to my head. I've been now saying 21, but it's again, same as a triathlon. If we now said we're going to shoot for it, if they miss it by a year, I'm still going to be happy. If they miss it by 2-3 years, so the goal is there. They're aware of it, hoping that they have this guilt factor to learn it. Hopefully more so there's enough fun stuff going on that they'll be interested, right? But no, we're not quite there yet. We're still trying. Yeah.
So if there's any parents listening that want to be involved or want to learn more about GenFire, where do they find you?
So it's just a newsletter right now, genfire.co. We've been setting up consistently for 2 months now, every Friday. It's still pretty raw, if you guys have seen it. I don't have time. I have 2 great rock star assistants out of the Philippines. One does content, one does the AI, as we talked about. We're still refining it. But again, it's chicken and egg. If we get bigger sooner, then we're able to attract more interesting speakers, interviewees, and content. And then that begets other people, right? So yeah, GenFire.co. We did our first of 100 interviews last week for the second book. And that content, as we discussed, would be dissected and packaged for distribution. I had the privilege to have crossed paths with a handful of billionaires, self-made billionaires. I've reached out to them and I've got at least 3 committed. I think I'll get all 5 to be interviewed.
Amazing.
After saving those for when we have their process worked out. So right now we're doing younger GenFire people, just getting practice ready.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that by the time we do 100, we would have gotten to some big names that share real insight. I think that it will make a really cool book.
So how can people find your first book? And then when does your second book come out?
First book's just all over. It's on Amazon. And by the way, I'm going to shamelessly promote it. We don't make that much money from it. The publisher takes most of the profits. But whatever is left over, we just donate to schools and events. So it's really not to make money. The second book, I'm targeting a year from now after we've done the interviews. And again, the idea is if we can do 100 influential, smart, insightful interviews and then deliver 50 videos in 5 languages out of the 100. Hopefully by the time we publish, let's say a year from now, we would have multiple 6 figures of subs. Then that would then get us a good bestseller ranking as well. So it kind of all fits together, the plan. Now we just have to get your help to get the word out and execute. And if all else fails, we never publish, which I don't see the case, and we never get a ranking, then at least we've learned from 100 super smart people, right?
Yeah.
So no downside there.
Yeah, no downside at all. All right. Thank you so much for your time, San. This is amazing.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
Again, great questions and great research. I appreciate you guys.
Thank you so much for listening until the end. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It'll help more people like you find us. You can find more about us on wild.show, WLD.SHOW. Please subscribe to our newsletter or DM us on Twitter. We'd love to get to know you.